Welcome. It's a great pleasure to be here with you this afternoon to discuss a very interesting topic. I'm wondering if we could have the doors closed so we don't get any noise coming in. Some guy having a pretty active conversation. Thank you very much. Thank you. So my name is Maximilian Jarrett, and I'm an honorary fellow at Murdoch University in Western Australia. And with me here today is Donald Clark, who's a professor, entrepreneur, investor, blogger, and quite a well-known speaker. All of his work in the last 4 to 5 years has been on the theme of AI, that is artificial intelligence as he defines it, in learning. And he has a new book coming out next year, which is AI, Artificial Intelligence for Learning. So without any further ado, we will have a brief presentation from Donald, and then we'll have an interactive discussion. Donald, you have the floor.
Thank you, Max. When I was asked to do this thing on AI and ethics, I thought, God, I'm gonna take along a tin hat or something, you know, because it's such a controversial topic. And I'm not going to shy away from the controversy, so I have a view here, and you know, there's so many views on AI and ethics, I'm pretty sure a lot of you will disagree with my view, but that's why we're here, folks. So I'll present my view first, and then we'll really get into some detail here, okay? Now, I thought, you know, what would be a good line just to start with, to just sum up my position, and that is that every man, woman, and their dog and uncle is setting up an AI and ethics committee at the moment. There are hundreds of them, literally hundreds of them. I think it's slightly hysterical. I can't remember any form of a technology that's had so much ethical attention by so many people. And when I read the output from some of these committees, it makes me want to weep, to be honest. You know, these little, like, Moses statements of, you shall not do this, you shall not do that. And I think it's quite destructive in many ways, mainly because AI is not nearly as good as you think it is, and it's certainly not as bad as you might fear. There is not a cat's chance in hell of this stuff killing you with a steak knife in your bed when you're asleep at night. A couple of weeks ago at DevLearn in the US, they had a robot teacher, Sophie, which was described by the head of Facebook, head of AI at Facebook, as a crap chatbot in a piece of plastic. And that's exactly what it was. They rolled Sophie onto the stage on wheels, and they proceeded to rattle on about AI and learning using a robot. There will be no robot teachers. That's stupid. It's a bit like having a robot, buying a robot after you've bought a self-driving car. Why would you buy a robot to drive a self-driving car? No, all this stuff's going to be online. It's going to be like Google, you know. It's nothing to do with robots. Now, I'm going to rattle through these 7 things here because these are, I think, the big topics. I haven't done a lot of reading in this area, and I'm going to start with the big ones first and then go right down to the learning things. The first one is this notion that there's going to be an existential threat to our species. You know, this thing's very soon going to kill us all. Now, anybody know who this is? Ray Kurzweil. Good. Now, he started all this off, really, by his book, The Singularity is Near. And by near, he thinks really near. He thinks 2045, we're going to have robots. We will be almost, well, actually, he's quite positive. He thinks it's going to be a good thing. But he thinks really we'll be overtaken by intelligence around 2045. I personally think there isn't a cat's chance in hell of that happening. I don't even think there is a thing which it will surpass. Human intelligence is a very complicated thing. It's not a thing in itself. I think he's totally misguided by his views of this. But there's a spectrum of opinion here from Elon Musk, who just comes out with a couple of sentences for PR effect, I think, to be honest. And then we've had Stephen Hawking, of course, who had a very dystopian view of this. It really is going to be trouble, guys. Right through to the middle ground, that's Stuart Russell. He's a real AI expert, wrote the classic textbook on the subject. Daniel Dennet down the bottom, a philosopher. He's got a middle ground view here. Don't worry too much. We can manage it. And then there's Pinker and Jack Ma, who absolutely say, listen, this is a good thing. And if we keep setting up AI and ethics committees, we will kill the very thing that's going to solve our medical problems and climate change and 101 other things. In other words, by simply setting up thousands of committees and scaring people off using AI, we will not use it for the great social goods such as health and medicine and education. And I'm with Pinker and Jack Ma on this. There's a whole load of books you can buy on this, the existential threat thing, right? This is almost unreadable, the Nick Bostrom book, but if you want to read that, it's actually quite good. This is a great book. I disagree with everything he says, but it's still a great book because he's one of the great, he's a really top level AI guy. Re-Engineering Humanity, I highly recommend. Very academic book, but very good about the slippery slope of technology. But really, the ones I would really recommend, if you agree with me, would be Daniel Dennet's Bacteria Back and Back Again. He loves alliteration. Terrible title, great book. Or Steven Pinker and Superminds. These are the people who are very optimistic, like me, about AI. Okay? These two in particular. The Dennett book. Dennett's very famous for a three-word definition of AI, which is it's competence without comprehension. Competence without comprehension. In other words, I'll illustrate this by example. I have a Roomba robot. I use this. You know, my robot comes out and it will sweep my carpet. It's great, fantastic. You know, if it comes to the stairs, it goes back. It has a brain. It maps out my house. It's super smart. Mathematically works out how to pick the dust up on the floor of my carpet. I also have a dog. And if my dog comes out, as it did, and did a shit on the carpet, the Roomba will spread it, mathematically of course, into every corner of the room. Because it literally doesn't know shit. It doesn't know anything, the Roomba. AI doesn't know anything. It'll beat you at chess. It'll beat every one of you at chess, poker, Go. It doesn't even know it's won. It's just software, guys. It's just code. There is no ghost in the machine. There's no mind or intelligence in there. Steven Pinker's view is very, very strong on this. He thinks it's entirely manageable. In other words, it's just an engineering problem. In other words, it won't run away with itself and maintain autonomy. I mean, we didn't have AI ethics committees on bridge building or any other form of technology before. Why have we got so many on AI? There is this view that it's going to run away with itself and overtake itself, but that's manageable. We can stop that. It's a design problem. If you've ever had to write an algorithm, it's damn difficult to write. It's damn difficult getting this stuff right in the first place. Never mind writing something that's going to be so good it's going to overtake humanity. And I think part of the problem is whenever you get technology, you get this sort of contrarian potboiler books. And this is a book I really hate by Cathy O'Neill called Weapons of Mass Destruction. Pinker has a very good essay on the existential threat where he said, remember when Bush and Blair invaded Iraq on the back of a big lie, the weapons of mass destruction? This was a serious business. 1 million people died in the back of those wars on a lie. And funnily enough, then it pops up, I was amazed to see it popping up on a book, which basically says, let's not use this stuff, it's all biased. And it's such a ridiculous statement to say all algorithms are biased. All humans are biased. You're all biased. You're all sexist. You're all racist. Kahneman got a Nobel Prize for finding out you've got about 50 biases. The penultimate page in that book says you can't train people, you can't educate people out of their biases. They're innate. You can change their behavior, but you don't change the biases. The thing with AI is you can change it. You can improve it. That's the difference. So existential threat, I wouldn't worry too much. Employment is another big one here. Now, this is a very famous state. It was actually, Audrey mentioned this morning, 47% of jobs will be automated in the next 2 decades. Now, this, of course, is nonsense. Interestingly, the Frey and Osborne report that was quoted this morning by the guy from Max Planck, and that was actually wrong. He had 2016. It was actually published in 2013. And the people from Oxford used AI to predict patterns of employment. And they said that 47% of jobs in the US would be under threat over the next 10 years. 2013. We're now in 2019, 6 years later. Okay? So we're 6/10 into the timeline, and there's almost full employment in the US. That didn't go well. And read Toby Walsh's book. He was here at this conference 2 years ago trashing the Frey and Osborne report because it was just bad AI. It was just terrible. It really is an awful piece of work. And they quite simply empirically got it wrong. This was the other one, and this was right. Audrey got this right. This was, I've seen it at this conference. I saw it last year in this conference, and it's completely fictitious. It was made up, and yet you see it in slides all over the world, like a meme. If you're looking for some serious text on economics and employment, and there's some really serious people writing about this stuff now. I mean, this goes back to Adam Smith, good old Scotsman, and who really tackled the whole issue of the way in which technology would actually help capitalism separate labor from capital, steal the profits, and not repay the people at the bottom of the line. He actually states that here, and of course this was built up by Marx, a very famous thing called a fragment on technology, where Marx discusses this in some detail. really well explained in this Paul Mason book, Post-Capitalism. Then we have Schumpeter, and then, of course, John Maynard Keynes, who invented the word technological unemployment, through to Carla Perez. That's all about the economic patterns around the application of technology, not necessarily AI. These books focus on AI. This one I highly recommend at the end here by Rana Farhur, but also The Future of the Professions by Susskind, Second Machine Getty. So there's plenty of stuff to read here on employment, if you want. I personally don't think it will have a massive effect on employment. It will change the roles within jobs, but people will be adaptable. They discussed taxi drivers in the plenary this morning. And what's interesting about taxi drivers, Tim O'Reilly, if you're a technical person, you will know that name because almost every coding book in the world was published by Tim O'Reilly. He has a great presentation on this. And he discusses London taxi drivers, or cabbies as they call them in English. Now, they used to have to study for 3 years, then sit this horrendous exam. They had to know every street in London, every route. It was a horrendous thing, and many failed. And of course, they no longer have to do that now. Uber is there. Well, maybe not. They've just been thrown out. And of course, actually what happened was that cab drivers have to learn new skills. They don't have to remember streets. They have to learn customer care. If you ever took a black cab in the 1980s and 90s and got regaled by this, by no customer service whatsoever, you'll know that they were badly in need of this. So the new skills are running a small business, being able to use the app, customer care. That's what you want from a cab driver. It's just that the skills shift. The third one here is losing our humanity, and that's quite a common one, especially in the educational field. In other words, we're going to mechanize everything. Will it take away the human element of education, teaching, training, and so on? This doesn't worry me, because I'd be quite glad. There was a landmark paper published in October. I was in the States in a teaching hospital at the time, and there was a great furore around this. So, meta-study shows that AI is as good as any human professional at medical imaging. In other words, if you get an X-ray, a CRI scan, CAT scan, AI is as good as reading it as a professional radiographer. This is a real landmark for our species, because it means that medical care should be a lot cheaper, a lot cheaper, and that money could be spent on diagnosis and treatment, and not the investigative process. In fact, it will get better. So AI has actually cracked the human good, okay? And then there are other things happening in if we jump into education, I've shown this many, many times here, the famous chatbot at Georgia Tech, which uses machine learning. And they just took a database of about 40,000 questions asked by students on one course, swapped one of the teaching assistants out for an AI bot, just swapped one out. Kids never guessed. These were AI students, kids studying AI, they never guessed. In fact, they put it up for a teaching award because it answered so quickly. In fact, they had to slow it down because it was answered so quickly, one of the kids went, hold on, that was too quick for somebody to have typed it in. So they put a typing delay in the software. Now, why did they put it up for a teaching award? Because in every other year, when they sent an email off to a member of faculty, they had to wait sometimes days, sometimes never even got a reply. That's hopeless. It's just completely inadequate. So surely we should be taking the weight of teachers by doing all that admin stuff using AI. Interestingly, in year 2, when they launched another 2, still some people didn't get it. Some thought that 2 of the real teachers were bots. Isn't that a bit weird? 2 of the real teachers were pieces of AI. Sorry, wrong way. Okay. Now, another thing that's come into our homes now, so I've got both the Google Assistant and the Alexa in my house, and a very interesting thing happens when you get this at first. You sort of abuse it to test its limits, and actually there's a really brilliant book on this by a guy called Vlalos called Talk to You, and it's about all the research behind the voice and persona of the Google Assistant and so on. We can come to that in a minute if you think there's a gender bias there. But what's interesting is the amount of data they have on the things that people say to these machines when they come into their home. And it's almost like sexual and physical abuse because they're testing the limit of the thing. Is it really human? Of course it's not. And of course they pre-script jokes just to camp people down. And then you use it for timers in the oven and, the usual stuff. You ask it questions, what's the weather like, and get the news and the reports and so on. An interesting thing about this human versus machine, I really love this example. So there's a German company, SAP, and they launched chatbots for recommendations of training paths as well as answering questions around L&D, hugely successful. And on the second year, the machine learning really improved the hit rate. In other words, it was giving very accurate answers to questions. What they also did, though, was ask the employees in SAP whether they liked this or not. So on the left-hand side, we have interaction with bot, 9, nearly 10. The old system, which was human beings, 8, 7, 6, 5. People preferred the bot because it was consistent, it was immediate, and it gave them what they wanted. Okay? I would rather queue up at an ATM to get cash out than walk into a bank. Even if there was a queue at the ATM, I'll stand in the queue rather than go and face a human being. I came through Tegel Airport, standing while a border guard. It looks like, well, not interested in the slightest. It could be all automated in a jiff. Face recognition. When I go back to Gatwick, that's exactly what happens. The airport nearest to my town, I just put my passport in and I walk through. You know, I don't want to deal with human beings. Why should I speak to human beings in that process? I don't want to speak to these strangers, really. On race, I know this is an interesting one because one of the charges, and I think that this is a really interesting one in debate, is that the problem with the output, it's a very odd thing to accuse algorithms of being racist. It's like accusing maths of being racist. Actually, it's not mostly in the algorithms, it's mostly in the data, and of course the data is drawn from the real world. So the data is reflecting the racism of human beings. It's not the maths or algorithms that are racist. It's a bit odd calling an artifact racist in that sense. But a charge that's quite often made is that all the programmers are white guys and that they're implicitly racist. Believe me, this is far from the truth. In fact, if you had a pie chart of coders in AI, I would imagine Chinese would be the biggest section of the pie, closely by the Indian subcontinent, a lot of people in the Far East, and then the sort of white coders would still be a chunk, but it would be modest. You know, I was in Stanford and Silicon Valley recently, and the place is awash with this huge melting point of people who are coding in this area. And if you look at, I don't know if you know who these people are, top left-hand corner, any idea who that is? Excellent, yeah, so that's the chief executive. You're going to get all of these, aren't you? Chief executive of Alphabet, Google. Anybody know who this is? Yeah, chief executive of Microsoft, both guys who were not only born in India, but actually had their education in India. If we go along the top here, so the three Chinese people, nobody knows them because that's Baidu, Tencent, and Alibaba, okay? And then we have Jeff Bezos, I put him in there as well. I didn't put Facebook up there because actually they're not really an AI company, I don't think, and neither are Apple. Apple are a product company. So, you know, don't imagine for 1 minute that it's dominated by a sort of Anglo-Saxon view of the world. I think this whole industry is permeated by a almost global multicultural base. Gender is one that often comes up as well. So if we start on the left-hand side, these things here, Siri, Cortana, Google Assistant, Amazon Alexa, you might think they're all, actually with these three at the bottom here, you can change them to male, female. You can even get them now in accents. So if you want this weird Scottish accent, you can have one of them if you want. Why you would want that, I don't know. So they're switchable, and that solves the problem in a way. Now, Google haven't chosen that. It is a woman, but the research was interesting. And all of these companies did a huge amount of research on the persona as well as the voice, the gender of the voice. You notice that Google don't give it a name. It's called Google Assistant, keeping it sort of neutral there, because they wanted to allow you as the user to choose. There were other reasons as well. Alexa are sticking to their guns, and it was very interesting in the book because the research showed that even fetuses in the womb respond very strongly to women's voices. And it's actually just generally true by a golden mile that people prefer women's voices in terms of trust when they're asking them questions and getting answers back. So this wasn't some sort of, it wasn't a sort of arbitrary choice here. It was genuinely based in reasonable research. Now, that may be a separate thing from its impact and perception in society, which we may discuss, of course. They may be two separate issues. But the straightforward charge that it was a sort of patriarchal plot doesn't really hold up much water because it was reasonably well thought out and researched. The second one in the middle here is, anybody seen the Netflix series Silicon Valley? All right, if you want to know about this stuff, watch that. He's seen everything. And there's a guy who looks out the window and he said, oh, it's the coding team. And he goes, how do you know it's the coding team? Well, he said, it's 5 guys. There's one Asian kid, one from the Far East, blah, blah. It's a typical Silicon Valley coding team, you know. And the guy said, that's amazing. You know, your insight into human nature there. And it's definitely the case that in the coding world, there is this massive discrepancy between male and female. Now, there are various arguments put forward there, and Baron Sacha Cohen, do you know him, the Ali G guy? His brother is a professor at Cambridge who's an expert on sexual difference. And he was really interesting on this. He's an expert on autism as well. So if you understand that in society there is a 7-to-1 ratio of male-female in autism, 7-to-1 male-female, and that autism or systematic thinking and its shades, as it were, sort of mirror and echo down into the general population, you will get a lot more men who, by preference, choose jobs that are highly systematic and introspective and to do with problem solving. That will happen if that is true. Now, I actually think that is true. So the evidence, it may be down to 4-to-1 because there may be some misdiagnosis, underdiagnosis of women, but it's still a big differential. So there might, I've been in the tech industry all my life, 35 years, and the ratio is roughly the same now as it was 35 years ago. And I suspect there's something else at work here. It may even be another cause here, which is in schools, there's good research on this, there are 2 causes for women not choosing computer science and STEM subjects. One is parental pressure, and the other is teachers. It's actually quite crystal clear what happens there. And now that's quite interesting, isn't it? In other words, it may be education itself which is the causal factor behind the subject choice problem there. There's another area for debate. And then Kathleen on the right-hand side here, there's another big debate about sex, those sex dolls like Sophie and all that sort of stuff. Harmony. Harmony's one with a Scottish accent. That's really weird. But in the Battle of Ideas in London, which was a great conference, by the way, really fierce sort of debate, saying there was a huge rumpus around the sex toys, the sex doll thing. And the charge was that, a reasonable charge, was that we should ban them. So she's an academic who thinks we should ban them because they objectify women. And that's a good argument. But there was a very interesting question from the audience, which said, that means the consequences of that Moses-type rule would be you'd have to ban all dildos, all sex toys, because they objectify men. That's a quite interesting example there, because sometimes the consequence of a moral imperative has unexpected consequences. And I think that's what's happening in AI. In the rush to come out with rules and moral imperatives, you sort of capture things that, I never thought about that. Let's not do that. And I think there's a great danger here with the hysteria around ethics in AI that we rush to false conclusions. Now, bias is a big one, of course. And you have to understand, I think, that AI is really statistical techniques. It's really statistical pattern matching. And we've had really 2 millennia or 2,000 years of statistics in pure maths here, okay? And the whole point of statistics is to get rid of error and bias. That's all it does. We spent 2,000 years as a species working on techniques to get rid of bias, and all we can do is accuse AI of bias. No, no, no. It's human beings that have bias. It's the data that has bias. This stuff works hard to get rid of bias. And again, I really recommend Joanna Bryson on Twitter. I follow her slavishly. I think she's easily the voice in Europe, really, this sort of voice of reason in all this, really. She's at the University of Bath. I hate this book, as I mentioned, but there are some other books here that tackle this bias issue in some detail here. Some of them are more populist than others. But again, coming back to Steven Pinker, Pinker has a good line on this, and remember, he's a psychologist. He actually thinks that the accusation of bias is a manifestation of bias in itself. He thinks that we have neophobia, in other words, we all fear the new. When you're a kid and you don't like to eat that thing that your mother gave you on the plate, or your father, that is neophobia. And it comes back to you later in life. You can measure it psychologically, and that we actually fear the new. I saw it this morning, when Audrey Waters said, let's not do any of this AI stuff. Everybody claps. Yeah, great. Let's not have your x-rays solved by AI. That's a hysterical madness. Let's stop all this stuff. As if everybody's ideological except Audrey. And I think Pinker's line here is it's not only neophobia. You have confirmation bias. You have availability bias. So Max is a journalist. The BBC, and of course, he was mentioning earlier, journalists love robot stories. They love this story. That makes it available. Almost everything you read in the press and on TV has this sort of stuff in it. So you see that, you think it is biased, but you're not really looking at the maths and whether it is really biased or not. Availability and confirmation bias are the two that Pinker think lie behind this, along with neophobia. And then lastly, transparency. It's a really interesting one, this. Should all algorithms be transparent? Now, loads of ethics committees have put this on their right top of the list. We will, in our university, not use any algorithm unless it's wholly and utterly transparent, until any first-year undergraduate in AI points out to them, well, you better stop using Google Scholar, Google, and almost every online tool you use. Because they're not transparent, they're proprietary. And then they go, no, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean stop using that. Well, what do you mean by transparent then? Now, there is a point about transparency on AI that has an impact on human beings, that sends people to jail, or on social policy. That's when it comes into play, certainly. But this demand for transparency is naive and utopian. So in the medical world, there's some quite good commentators from the medical side in this. Loads of drugs, we have no idea how they work. Very famous drug in cystic fibrosis. We haven't a clue how it works. But boy, if you have a 12-year-old daughter or son with cystic fibrosis, you want that drug because it has a desired outcome. And rather than focusing on outcomes, we have these almost completely ridiculous and overstated and overblown moral rules about this stuff, demanding transparency when it's not necessary. And that may prevent things from happening. It may stop you using Google Scholar. This won't happen, of course. They'll quietly dispense with that rule eventually. You won't use YouTube because that also is mediated by AI when you search, or Google. I'm going to finish with one thing. I'm going to put you to a moral test here now. So some weird things are happening in the world in terms of AI and education. First of all, if you do go into one of these companies along the corridor and proctoring, they will take face recognition just to make sure you're sitting the exam. That's fair enough, so that your smarter brother isn't fooling you. However, what about sentiment analysis? Suppose I started reading your emotions in your text and your emails. Suppose I was gathering all your emails as a student and trying to figure out what you really felt about things. Do you start to feel a little bit uneasy about that? You know, when you were 18, 19? Supposing, and this is happening in China, kids turn up to school, several thousand, and they walk through gates and they get face recognition. And you're starting to feel really uneasy here now in privacy. But any of you been a teacher? Any had to take a register of 30 kids every morning for 5 days a week for 3 years? When no teaching takes place? Don't you think you want to get rid of that? So suddenly it seems actually quite reasonable, this, especially if the data is held it's secure and there are no problems with leakage and so on. Supposing you say I'm going to use face recognition to look at kids, as I could do with all of you in the audience, to see if you guys at the back are actually on Facebook or not, or to see what your emotion was. Are you disagreeing with me? Am I annoying you? Do you agree with me? Have your eyebrows just gone up? Then it starts to be a bit intrusive in a way. But actually, in some cultures, it may not be. And you know, in a sort of Confucian-based social culture like China, there is less worry about this because they have a different view of the world and society. And I think there's something to be said for this. What if I put a headset on you? Because this is happening now, BrainCo. It reads EEG. I don't believe it for 1 minute that it actually works because it's a bit like reading noise. But it's got 5 lights on the forehead, and the teacher can tell whether they're paying attention or not. It all gets zapped back to the teacher, and they can control the class. The data even goes to the parents. Are you starting to feel really uneasy about this now? Can you imagine as a kid that your parents knew about everything you did at school? Now, in an individualistic culture like Europe and America and so on, people are horrified by this. But when this company went and spoke to teachers, parents, they absolutely loved this in China. Because there's a different ethos there. And who are we to say that they're absolutely wrong in this? And we should impose our individualistic, things are not going particularly well in our world. So who are we to impose our values on other people in that sense? And then there's the last one, which is really weird. So there's a whole load of frontier technology, both non-invasive and invasive, and the most famous one is Neuralink. There are far better ones, which actually put probes into your brain. And there was a very interesting paper last year of the implantation of memory. This is used on human beings. So I put a headset on you, and just before you go to sleep, I tune into your REM sleep, and I reinforce a certain skill. It's actually critical thinking. It's actually a problem-solving skill. And they measure people when they wake up, and sure enough, they can, in novel situations, they have learnt that skill while they were sleeping because the consolidation from the hippocampus has tuned into the rhythms of the electrical stimulation of the brain. That's a real paper with a real output. This is really interesting, reading your mind, actually implanting learning, and that's non-invasive. Imagine what happens when you get invasive things, and they're already here with cochlear implants. People can hear. We know the brain adapts to these devices very nicely. It sort of wraps around them and becomes part of the brain. Supposing I promised that you could learn any language in a week. Would you take that for $50? I would. But there are worries about surveillance as well. Okay? So I'll end there, and we'll get into some discussion. I have no doubt that many people here will disagree with almost everything or some of the things I've said. But I'm fairly relaxed about this because, as I say, I don't think it's as good as people think it is or nearly as bad as some of the ethical. Steven Pinker had a nice line here. He said, doomsday is hot. Everybody loves doomsday stories. Climate change might be the real problem here. That's a real doomsday story. Don't for 1 minute imagine that AI might actually be our savior in solving some of these other problems. And if we keep on hammering it, we may be killing the goose that lays the golden eggs here, especially in education. Okay?
Thank you very much, Donald.
Thank you.
What side do you want to be on with?